Let me ask you one more question, Dahlia, about under the heading of peace. Very interestingly, you, as we said at the top, are involved with Mitvim, which is the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. One of the things you've been doing there over the last year or so, I think, or two, has been looking at other conflicts, including Cyprus, South Africa, and so on, and trying to mine those conflicts for anything of value for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, simple question, top line, 2 or 3 things, what have you learned?
There's so much to think about. I'm really happy you raised this, because I think the first thing that I would like to tell anybody who's watching is that we should be doing this kind of thing. And this is, I have no personal interest. I don't gain anything from it. I just think that it's a very valuable way to look at human beings, right? We're all human beings. I think it's valuable to remember that we're not in the worst conflict of the entire world. There are other conflicts that are just as bad. Our enemies are not the worst enemy ever to be confronted. We're not the worst victims ever in history. Putting your own conflict into perspective allows us to kind of it allows us to just put ourselves into perspective, and I think it helps lower some defenses. So I would just, first of all, say I certainly learned that the comparative approach is valuable. Having said that, I want to move on to talk about some of the specific issues, and maybe I'll just tie it to begin with the previous topic about confederation. I always get asked, where has this ever worked in the world? And as a comparative, advocate, there are 2 cases that maybe sound counterintuitive at first, but one case where a confederation-like approach, not necessarily called a confederation in either case, has been used to keep the peace and to actually create the peace. And keeping the peace, I'm talking about the European Union. The same concept, not necessarily called a confederation, but independent states that are in a voluntary sort of association where they can voluntarily leave, as you so well know, have managed to cooperate on economy, security, law, residency without citizenship, and it's really helped to keep the peace after the world's worst ever conflict in human history. I think that's a valuable lesson from other parts of the world. Another one is Bosnia. Again, very controversial to say this is a success because there's lots of criticism, but the fact is that a separate and together approach, again, not called a confederation, but where both the parties that were at war in a very brutal context reached a political constitutional arrangement where they had separate entities that are involved in a single state arrangement, but with a lot of autonomy, so much autonomy that there's criticism that they have trouble functioning together, which is why it's almost more like a confederation than what it's actually called, which is a federation. But that was used to end the war. Now, it's created massive problems. Their joint government is often paralyzed. People say the agreement needs to be updated after 25 years. But for 25 years, well, 1995, 23 years, since the Dayton Accords helped to end the war in Bosnia, they have not had war or conflict escalation along ethnic lines. Now, we can't go one day without having some sort of violence among the Israelis and Palestinians. I'd give a lot to see us go 23 years without having a serious escalation. So I think there's what to learn from there. That's one specific thing that came out of the research. Another, but there are many. I mean, I think one of the most important aspects to think about is when negotiations should be held or not. Because if negotiations are held under poor conditions, and I mean by non-legitimate leaders, or when their failure could lead to violence, it might be better not to hold them and work on improving the conditions that can lead to successful negotiations afterwards.